We all have those students that, given the opportunity, are more than happy to sit and passively let other students do the hard work for them. Therefore, in this session, we are going to talk about ways that we can engage all students in learning during the literacy block. When we think about student engagement, our goal as teachers is always to engage our students as fully as we can and reach as many students as possible. We know that as we increase students' motivation to participate in higher order thinking skills and critical thinking skills, we're able to decrease off-task behaviors in our classroom. So what does active learning look like in terms of getting all students engaged? Active learning forces passive learners to become engaged in tasks that are required for the classroom students to participate in. Therefore, the classroom experiences that we create must involve all students at all times. So I want to give you some scenarios to think about as we move through some strategies for engaging students. First, I want you to think of a whole group journeys lesson. Regardless of the grade level, all of our journeys lessons start with a vocabulary routine using the vocabulary card. If students are raising their hand to give information during this part of the lesson, are all students thinking about the words? And if students are merely copying information that a student gives and the teacher writes on the board onto their own cards, are they really internalizing what that word means? Next, it's time to read the text. Popcorn reading may be utilized to read the text, where one student or teacher reads a paragraph or a page, then they popcorn to the next student to read. But during that reading time, are all students really following along? Or do you have those students that read at a faster rate than the current student that's reading, and they're way ahead? Or those students who are so worried that they're going to get asked to read next, that they're busy looking ahead at any words they might not know? Then we have questions for comprehension that the teacher generates throughout the lesson and during the reading. If students raise their hand one at a time to answer these questions, how many students are actually raising their hand throughout the course of the lesson? And of those students that are raising their hands, how many of them actually get to answer a question? The next scenario I would like to propose is a small group reading lesson. In our primary grades, most teachers start with a phonemic awareness warm-up. In this case, think of wanting to hear each child's response. So you go around the table, giving a word to each student to manipulate. How many words total is that student manipulating if each student has gone around the table to do a word? If there's 6 students in your group, that may be 1 out of 6 opportunities. Next, we often have some type of word drill to practice a phonics or decoding skill. If we have 5 lines on a page of these words, and each student reads 1 line, how many words are they reading out of the total? Let's say there's 25 words. If they each read a line, they're reading approximately 4 to 5 words versus 25 words. Then it's time to read the text. If each student at the table reads 1 paragraph or 1 page, let's think about that in terms of the age of our students. Say it's an upper elementary student and there's roughly 150 words on a page in a chapter book. If you read 6 pages during a lesson and there's 6 students in your group, each student has now read 150 words and had to use decoding strategies on 150 words. But if you multiply that times 6, there was a total of 900 words that were possibly practiced. In our primary grades, our pages and number of words range per page. So if we go by each student reading 1 page, one student may have 5 words versus a student who has 10 words versus a student who has 25 words on a page versus a student who has 12 words on a page. Is that equitable opportunity to practice decoding skills and become a better decoder? Or would it be better to have all students reading all 52 words on those pages? And say we ask roughly 5 questions about the text we're reading, and there's 6 students in our group. Is each student even going to have the opportunity to answer a question? So as we think about those scenarios and in creating an engaging learning environment, there are strategies that we can utilize that will increase the engagement and number of opportunities of practice for all students. Listed here on this slide are a few of them, and we're going to take a closer look at them and how you can utilize them during your literacy block instruction. First is choral responses. Choral responses are when all students answer together at the same time. This works best when you're teaching a very explicit and systematic lesson, like phonemic awareness, or phonics, or advanced decoding, or even vocabulary. Each time you present for students to respond, you're able to give a signal as a teacher. I like to point to myself when it's my turn, and the students when it's their turn. By signaling to all students, everyone responds, but additionally, I'm able to add in wait time. We know that our students think at different speeds, so some students might need a few extra seconds to formulate their response. If we as teachers, because we're asking for choral response, wait a few extra seconds before signaling the class, that will engage more students. Next is think, turn, and learn. This is a strategy Jackie Fox has also talked about in math. And what is really nice about this strategy is that unlike think, pair, share, where students are basically talking at each other, so here's a student, they say what they want to say to this student says what they want to say to this student, but there's not really a lot of interaction. With turn and learn, students are listening to each other and responding to each other, and sentence starters and scaffolds can really help when teaching students how to turn and learn. Another strategy that works really well is collaborative learning with roles and random grouping. First, I'll talk about the random grouping. Students get tired of working with the same students every day. There's also limitations when we homogeneously group students by ability. And we know if we let them form their own groups, there is social interactions that occur within your classroom, and the same students are always going to go together for the groups. When we use a random generator, students aren't tied to anything except for that day. So they may have a group of students they have to work with, but it's going to change again tomorrow, which is very motivating for them. So they don't feel stuck in a group, especially if something about that group doesn't work. Next, I'll talk about the roles within collaborative groups. It's really easy for one student to take over a task in a group, but if you assign roles where everyone has a specific job to do relating to the task, then accountability is much higher for students that may passively sit and let others do the work typically. Annotating is important whether it's in 1st grade or 5th grade. It may look different, and it may be writing in the text, it may be on sticky notes, it could be pictures, or it could be on the computer like Lisa Gormley has been coming in and showing our upper elementary teachers how to do. But when you ask students to annotate during reading, you're giving them a purpose for reading. When students have a clear purpose of what they're supposed to do with their reading, they're going to be more engaged. And additionally, not only 1 or 2 students have to annotate and engage with the text, but the expectation is that every student is doing it and every student has something on their sticky notes or written. Quick writes are nice little conclusions to lessons that allow students to reflect on their learning and also give you as a teacher a quick informal assessment of their learning and thinking. You can give them 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and ask them to write to a certain idea that they talked about during the text that day. But all students are writing, not just 1 or 2 responding orally. Other things that we build in may be things like thumbs up and thumbs down. We do a lot of that during our vocabulary lessons. Or whiteboards, if the written response is short, they can write it and everybody show it for that quick informal assessment for you. That takes care of the portion of activities that we do with the text. But what about the actual reading of the text? There's a few different strategies we can implement so that all students have the same opportunity to read the words in the text. The first is choral reading. Choral reading is when all students read the same words at the same time. Choral reading really takes away any stresses for a student that might not be as strong of a reader because their voice is one of many. Next, we have fill in the blank read alouds. This is where the teacher reads. And with a journey's text, it really is a read aloud experience for our students. So when the teacher reads aloud, they're able to model what good fluent reading looks like. While there's no embarrassment or shame to students because they're simply following along with their eyes. However, the teacher may stop at certain words that might be vocabulary or a specific word with a decoding skill the class is working on. And when the teacher pauses, the students are expected to fill in that next word as an accountability piece for following along. This pace is also a little quicker, so you get through a lot more of the text a lot faster. And those students who wouldn't typically be able to access the text are now also able to be actively involved. There's always going to be those students, though, who may not participate when you pause on a word to fill in the blank, so the teacher can simply walk around the room while reading and tap a student on the shoulder at any given time, and they have to point to the word that's being read. Simultaneous oral reading is wonderful for our primary students and our older struggling readers. Simultaneous oral reading allows students to read in a whisper at the same time. They can start in the same place or different places, but the teacher can listen to all students reading and engage with individual students as needed during the reading. If students finish early, they simply go back and reread for fluency, so there's no downtime where students aren't practicing. Scaffolded or guided silent reading is very appropriate for our older students because as students get older, they can read and understand what they're reading while they're reading in their head silently. So as a teacher, if you create a purpose for a specific section of text, students will read to a certain spot for that purpose. While students are reading silently, the teacher can ask individuals to whisper read to them so they can monitor students reading. And then the group comes back together to talk about that purpose for reading. So here's an example of how I can use multiple strategies that we've just discussed within one literacy block lesson of journeys. Choral responses, thumbs up, thumbs down, collaborative random grouping, to complete vocabulary work will be very meaningful for our students. During advanced decoding with our upper grade students, choral responses are more than appropriate. While reading the journeys text, you use the fill-in-the-blank reading, so all students are engaged. Turn and learn, echo reading, and quick writes could all be utilized throughout the comprehension portion. Last, we have our small group instruction. Using choral responses versus individual for phonemic awareness work, warm-ups, phonics word reading drills, and for even text reading or simultaneous choral reading may be utilized so that all students have equal opportunities. To model fluency, echo reading can be used, And students can write on whiteboards for comprehension so all